me out my bedroom window that lady got away
Good evening. This is a meeting of the Athens Board of Zoning Appeals. At this time, 7:05, the meeting is now called to order. The date is October 10, 2006. The board consists of 5 members and 2 alternates. The alternate takes full part in discussions of the board and becomes a voting member in the absence or conflict of interest of a regular member. Excuse me. Present this evening are members John Golsey, Roger Gruser, Greg Lavelle, and Hector Flores, our alternate, who this evening is going to be sitting as a regular voting member, and I am Muriel Frederick, the chair. Also present this evening are Steve Pearson, our zoning administrator, Paul Eschenbacher, our acting secretary, and Michael Miller from the law director's office. The board operates according to the following procedure. The chair names and describes the case. The zoning administrator cites the specifics of the refusal. The appellant or a representative then will state the case for granting the appeal. Testimony next will be taken from those who support the granting of the appeal, then those who wish to speak in general comment, and those who support the denial of the appeal. Following all testimonies, the board will receive the concluding remarks from the appellant. Discussion from the floor then will be closed. The board will deliberate and render a decision. Under Athens City Code Section 230703B, the board has the power to grant such variances from the code as, quote, will not be contrary to the public interest, so that the spirit of the code shall be observed, public safety and welfare secured, and substantial justice done. Athens City Code Section 230910C further requires that variances from the code shall not be granted unless the board makes specific findings of facts based directly on the evidence provided to it that each and every one of the following 6 criteria are met. Number 1 is practical difficulty or undue hardship. There must exist a practical difficulty or an undue hardship caused by exceptional circumstances which pertain to the specific piece of property. Exceptional circumstances is the second. There must exist exceptional circumstances or conditions applying to the property or its intended use that do not in general apply to properties in the same zoning district. The third is preservation of equal property rights. It must be determined that literal interpretation of the code would deprive the appellant of rights commonly enjoyed by others in the same vicinity, while granting the variance would not convey a special privilege. The fourth is that it must be a minimum variance. It must be determined that the variance is the minimum required to make reasonable use of the property. The fifth is absence of detriment. It must be determined the granting of the variance will not be of substantial detriment to adjacent properties, nor materially impair the purposes of the code or the public interest. And finally, not of a general nature. The variance sought must not be of a general or recurring nature, such that the situation would more reasonably be handled by changing the law. Any person who's aggrieved by the decision of the board may file an appeal to the Court of Common Pleas. Such petition must be filed within 30 days after the mailing of the board's resolution to the applicant. This evening there are 4 cases on the agenda. Well, actually, I understand that the first case, 0624V, for 547 East State Street, is not going to be heard this evening. They are either going to continue or withdraw. But there is the second case is 0625V for 102 West Union Street, which is zoned B1. Abdi Sheikh is the appellant. Number 0626V for 351 Carroll Road, which is zoned R1. Isaac and Julie Thomas are the appellants. And 0627V for 20 Graham Drive, which is zoned R1. Michael Moulton is the appellant. The board is required by law to take testimony under oath. Anyone who's wishing to speak this evening, even if you think you might possibly speak, please stand to be sworn. Okay. Do you swear that the testimony you will give to be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you. hurt things at all. Thank you so much. I don't know what's going on here, but anyway. The first case, which we're not hearing, was the one, is for sure not being heard, right? I don't see them here, so they're not. Right. The second case is 102 West Union Street. Is Mr. Shake here? Do you know him?
I don't see him here in the audience. Is there anyone here representing 102 West Union Street?
No, it would appear then that that one is not going to be heard this evening either. So, okay. The third case, which is our case number 1 now, is 0226V for 351 Carroll Road, zoned R1. Isaac and Julie Thomas are the appellants, and could you give us the details of the refusal for their front yard setback request?
Yeah, if I could, I'd like to give a little explanation about the first 2 cases and why there may not be someone here. I'm required by law to advertise in the newspaper at least 10 days in advance of the agenda, and also to notify the adjoining property owners. At the time of the advertisement, to the best of my knowledge, there were only going to be 4 board members available. And that being the case, appellants have the option to have their case continued until there are 5 members. And so during that, essentially during that week of notification time, I was still under the impression that there were only 4. I tried to call all the appellants to tell them that they had an option. In case 1, I finally just yesterday, after knowing, Ms. Frederick, you were going to be available, found that out just yesterday. I called Mike Knoll and asked him if he still wished to have his case heard tonight. He said that he may withdraw. They may not want to ask for the sign that that was advertised on the agenda, or they might want to modify it. So it'll either be modified or heard as presented at the next meeting, or completely withdrawn.
He will be heard next meeting then, if that's what they decide.
Right. Having trouble even getting a hold of appellants to tell them that there may not be 4 board members, and then finding out that there was a 5th available just yesterday. Yeah. You can imagine there were a lot of phone calls. But I did advertise in the newspaper and to the adjoining property owners, because everyone has the option of having their case heard by 3 or 4 members, but they can wait until there's 5. In the second case, I tried to get a hold of the appellant, and the phone number that I had for him when I called it just said, "This phone does not receive incoming phone calls." And he's from Columbus, so I thought about driving to Columbus over the weekend, but I didn't. That's okay. So, given the unusual circumstance and the notification problems, I don't know about you guys, but I really don't have a problem with him coming to the next meeting.
Not a problem at all. And apologize, but there were some logistical difficulties in getting you notified, considering the distance I had to come and the way I was getting here. So
that's all right. I just want to give a little explanation about that.
Okay.
The cases were all advertised because there is that option, and I am required by law to advertise in the newspaper and notify all the adjoining property owners. Okay. Now, case number 3 is that
they're wanting Isaac and Julie Thomas,
351 Carroll Road.
Right.
351 Carroll Road, to my best of my knowledge, is the last vacant lot in Oakmont 3. It's on that long extension of Carroll Road, headed back in. It would be in the last block of Carroll Road before you get down to Warwick. Between Dove and Warwick, there are 2 houses on the corner, and then 2 houses on the corner, one just back from the furthest house in this vacant lot. So this is the last lot to be built on. The request is for a 16-foot setback instead of a 25-foot setback. And the arguments of the appellants are contained in the record, and each one of you received a copy of that. It addresses practical difficulty, undue hardship, exceptional circumstance, absence of detriment, all those issues that are required to be answered by an appellant, and on which the board must base its findings.
Steve, do you recall that the case that we heard a few months ago that was on Carroll Road and we denied the variance because of the setback? Do you know what the outcome of that was? It was built eventually, wasn't it?
Right, the house was built in accordance with the required 25-foot setback.
25 feet, okay.
Yeah, I got some calls from people in the neighborhood that wanted to know why that house seemed to be further in front of the house right next door to it that actually had received a variance. What happened was the house with the variance was actually constructed at about 28 feet back. So even though they had a variance, they didn't take advantage of it. The house that was built where the variance was denied is in front of that house, but it's not in the required 25-foot front setback.
And that was kind of a very steep in the back, wasn't it? If I recall, they had a retaining wall they built, I think.
Right.
Yeah.
There was a retaining wall that was constructed in order to give, with the requested front setback there, I think the builder said they would have had like a 40-foot backyard from the back of the house to the retaining wall. So the house was still able to be constructed. That retaining wall was not a structural element of the house.
Yeah.
So, and that's what they used essentially they built that large concrete reinforced retaining wall, filled behind it rather than fill to a point where a wall wasn't holding back part of the hill. Yeah, and a lot of these lots around in that area of Oakmont, because really all the backyards on that last stretch of Carroll, on Dove, and on Warwick essentially back onto on a big ravine right there. Everybody's backyard falls off pretty steep. If you happen to have a chance to go up in that neighborhood and look, there's some very high rear basement walls on a lot of those structures right there. I believe in the appellant's arguments, in order to meet the setback requirement, their builders told them that 25 courses of block will be necessary. So at 8 inches of block, that's, I don't know, 18 feet, approximately 18 feet of masonry back wall. That height will be diminished if they can move the house forward. Let's see, I did go out and measure all the houses that are out there. There is one house around the corner on Warwick that had a variance. The builder built the house before finding out for sure where the property line was. And that variance was granted. Also, I measured the right-of-way. Carroll Road has a 50-foot public right-of-way. Assuming that the road pavement centered in that 50 feet, there is, the right-of-way is 4 feet behind the sidewalk. So you have the street curb, a tree lawn, a sidewalk, and another 4 feet of grass. And then that's where the actual end of the property is at, or the start of the property, the end of the right-of-way. Therefore, the distance from the back of the sidewalk to the face of the garage will be 20 feet. And I know I just today received a letter from a neighbor who lived right across the street. I believe she told me her letter is opposed to granting the variance, and I think part of her argument, or at least in our discussion, part of the argument was the distance from the face of the garage back would a vehicle block the sidewalk. So that's why I went out and measured it today to make sure that I could verify the distance from the back of the sidewalk, which is 4 feet into the right-of-way, to the face of the garage, what that distance would be, and that distance would be 20 feet.
From the sidewalk to the front of the garage.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 4 feet of the driveway would be in the right-of-way and not share in common an area with the sidewalk, which is an area prohibited from parking in. Any area common to a sidewalk and a driveway, you can't block in any way. So from an area that you can't block, the far side, the back side of the sidewalk to the face of the garage will be 20 feet. 4 feet of right-of-way, 16 feet of actual property.
Okay. Does anybody have any questions for Steve? Thank you very much. All right, we're ready to hear from our appellants. And when you get to the mic, would you state your name and your address for the record, please?
I'm Julie Thomas, and my current address is 35 Avon Place, and the address that I am here about is 351 Carroll Road in Athens. My husband is unable to be here. This is Bob Edwards, and he's one of my builders, so he's here. All right. In addition to the letter that he received opposing, I also just received, I have 4 letters There are 5 different families that wrote letters in support.
Okay.
And so I was told I could bring those here tonight to
Yes,
show
you
you, so
can.
I'd be glad to pass those out.
If you'd like to pass those on, we'll be ready to put them in the record.
And a couple pictures in addition.
Thank you.
Thank you.
One of the things I wanted to mention is that our block is actually 12 inches instead of 8, which helps the back wall there. Right now we're at 20 courses, and it will be at least 25 courses high. And I know that a lot of the neighbors have mentioned that all of the neighbors on Warwick, Dove, all of their backyards look at the back of our house, and they were telling me that they'd much rather have shorter back wall to look at for their view than worry about the front, which is minimal to them. They drive by it every day. It wouldn't change their view for driving or anything. There's a letter from someone else right across the street from us as well, and there's one from neighbors that are right next to us, and then there are 2 more that are farther down. So they're all they all have a different point of view from where our house is.
The letters.
They're coming.
Yeah, they're coming.
They're on the way. They're on the way down the line. Okay. And when you made your purchase of this property to build your house, had you
Yes.
already chosen the plan? I mean, how? Tell me about why you purchased a property that is sort of like pretty much vertical to put a house on.
Yeah. Okay. All the lots in this subdivision were put there. They were made available so that anyone can build a home on them. And when we had the plan figured out, but when we went to actually do the stakes and figure out where the house would go, we found out that actually having the wall that high would be more detrimental to the structure of the house. We'd have to bring in a lot more fill, it didn't seem to me that was necessarily something that we needed to do when we can just have it a little bit closer and the structure of the house would be safer. We wouldn't have to worry about having like 10 truckloads coming in on the street and all the noise and all the dirt.
It was platted for construction, and the figuring would be that people would be setting it back in the proper setback, and they would do exactly the thing that you're asking not to have to do.
Next door.
Yeah, that's the problem, is that when it was platted, the expectation was that whoever built on it would do that sort of wall and so forth. Had you considered at any point any kind of a building design that would take advantage of the hill, the slope of the hill, so that your actually the structure of your house would have a walk-in section as a lower floor, and then I've seen houses done that way in places like San Francisco where they have this sort of problem all the time, where you take advantage of the slope of the land in the.
Right.
Was that anything you considered?
Well, we thought about that, but we wanted to make sure we had a 2-story home with a basement that we could walk in, and also have a home that, like everyone else's that lives there, they have that type of home, and we didn't feel we should have to change the whole structure of our house to have a house that's in similar likeness to everyone else's in the subdivision. We noticed in the deed restrictions that's something that's very important to everybody there. They want them to have the likeness.
So you felt you couldn't do that kind of a thing and still have the house look like everyone else's house.
Right.
Okay. Let's see, folks. Does anybody have questions, specific questions? Particularly those of you who have already had the chance to read the letters. If you have questions for her, this would be the time while the rest of us read fast.
I don't have any questions at this point.
Okay. I would, at this point, read when I've got them all in hand. I will read for the record the letters that have been received. Let's see. I've got the one from Michael and Teresa Meyer at 353 Carroll Road. It says, we're writing this memo in support of Julie and Isaac Thomas, who are attempting to gain a variance on the construction of their new home. We will be living next door to the Thomases, and believe that 8 to 9 feet will in no way impact the appearance of the home in the neighborhood or have any negative impact on the neighborhood. To the contrary, we believe that building a home in this empty lot will enhance the quality of our neighborhood. And given both, well, given the fact that both these individuals are valuable members of our community, both teachers at the grade school and high school, deserve the benefit of the doubt on this matter. Since we've recently had a set of twins, will not be able to attend the meeting, but they wanted to have their opinion in support. And then we've got from 28 Curran Drive, from Jitakarn Risner, in reference to case 0626V, a request for variance for Isaac and Julie Thomas for their property at 351 Carroll Road. We, the owners of the property at 354 Carroll Road, Jeffrey and Jitakarn Risner, have no objections to the request. We believe a modified setback of 16 feet would not be detrimental to the properties of our street or neighborhood. The steep slope of the hill makes the need for fill necessary, and a greater setback would require greater fill, which could have an adverse effect on the hill's appearance and stability. We hope this request for a variance is granted. Now let's see, that's not two of them. This is the one, I'm going to read all the ones in favor. Well, I'll mix them up. I'm going to read the one that's against, and then two more in favor. The one from 352, which is directly across the street from y'all's property. Dear, and the writer is Sophia Starzik. I will not be able to attend the public hearing concerning the request for a variance that's been filed for property at 352 Carroll Road. I leave it for the property. She lives at 352, for the property at 350.
Ms. Prince, you have...
Yes, 350 is your property, right?
351.
351, okay. I live at 352 Carroll Road in Athens, Ohio. My house is situated exactly across from the property where Mr. and Ms. Thomas plan to build their family house. I wanted to express my concerns about the approval of the 16-foot front yard setback. I think the variance would result in a negative visual impact on our neighborhood. This is a well-established neighborhood at this point, and giving a variance will be a special privilege given to the applicants. Mr. and Ms. Thomas decide to build their house in this well-established neighborhood, and they should meet the compatibility standards. They should try to blend into our environment and fit in with neighbors, have a positive rather than a negative impact. I do not see justifiable reasons for a reduction of the minimum front yard setback. The house located at 353 Carroll Road has been built according to the Athens City Zoning Code. Reducing the front yard setback will put the house less than 5 meters from the sidewalk. I'm concerned that if applicants will choose to park their vehicle in their driveway, there will not be an adequate area to park without obstructing the sidewalk. Furthermore, Carroll Road is quite narrow, and with their house being only 16 feet from the road, I will not be able to fully enjoy my house. I fear it may also have a negative impact on the real property value should I need to sell. I would like to emphasize that granting the variance will not be beneficial to our neighborhood. I'm certain Mr. and Ms. Thomas will be able to have a reasonable use and enjoyment of the property without the variance. And thank you for your consideration. And then from Jeff and Mariah Short at 15 Warwick Lane, in reference to case 0626V, a request of variance for Isaac and Julie Thomas for the property at 351 Carroll Road, we, the owners of 15 Warwick Lane, Jeff and Mariah Short, have no objections to this request. We believe the setback of 16 feet would not be a problem to the properties in our neighborhood. The slope of the hill will make it necessary for a large amount of fill dirt to be sure the home is stabilized properly. This will not impair our view as we drive by the house. It will only enhance it. We hope this request for a variance is granted. And then, actually, this is from this one letter is signed by two different families, from 7 Warwick Lane and 8 Dove Drive. It's James and Angela Thomas and Jeff and Dee Morgan. I understand our future neighbors Isaac and Julie Thomas are seeking a variance for their property. We're in support of approving this variance, allowing a setback of 16 versus 25 feet. We're neighbors living on the side streets of Dove and Warwick. From our perspective, we will be looking at their backyards. We understand their backyard. We understand no matter what the setback will be, that the front of the house will have the same 2-story height and curbside appeal. As for the back of the house, a further setback will significantly increase the height of the lowest level. This height difference will not be uniform when comparing all the other houses on Dove, Warwick, and Carroll Road. Our neighbors on 5 Warwick Lane had a variance that allowed the Murphys to be closer to the road. I do not feel this distance has disturbed the curbside appeal of their property. I understand throughout the Oakmont subdivision that having a minimal setback there are properties with variances approved to allow a house to be closer to the road. We're in favor of including this property to be approved for a variance so the house will fit appropriately on the steep slope of 351 Carroll Road. And those are our letters from all your new neighbors.
Thank you.
And there is one question that I wanted to ask Steve anyway later about whether or not the reference. But anyway, now that we've got all the letters, does anybody have anything that they need to ask about this property? It's a beautiful location out there. There are some other people who've had the same sort of problem that you've had, however, and have managed to deal with it.
Right. We also understand that this lot has been available for 8 years. The
Yes.
last lot to go. A ton of builders have been building houses, and none of them have touched this lot.
Yeah.
So they've all been leaving. They were even going to take it off the market because it wasn't selling. And I talked to some of the builders, and they were saying that there was way too many difficulties, and they didn't want to deal with it for someone else. There are other houses that are being sold just fine, with some houses around them having the distance being different. I don't know that it would necessarily. I don't know if there's proof to say that it would change how well something would sell.
Yours is a
so.
pretty steep slope.
Yes.
Okay, well, do you have anything further you want to say at this time, or do you want to have the builders say anything at this time?
As Julie said, my name is Bob Edwards. I represent Canadian Homes. We'll be building the home. I don't really have anything to add other than what's been discussed. Certainly, whether the variance is granted or not, the lot is buildable. It would be a, I'm going to use the term easier do, a more feasible do if we could move the house forward. I think for a lot of reasons. And again, as Steve was saying, we're actually going to use 12-inch block rather than 8, so you're talking about an even higher wall. Again, it can be done, no question, but in consultation with the Thomases and us and just our experience in 50 years in building, if we could just move it 9 feet, it would make a significant difference in the structure. And again, the letter that the lady in opposition sent, I think she might be misled there and doesn't understand exactly where the house is going to sit.
Well, it didn't sound like
Yeah,
she's
it's not going to be near that close to the road. So.
How would you go higher height if you're going from 8-inch block to 12-inch block? I guess 12 inches is a width, right? It's not the height.
Height.
They
Block will be
they've
lower.
got
would be
12-inch
8.
high block now?
Yes.
When they invent those?
I don't know, that we've been using them for some time.
I'll be darned.
So this 20 course is based on
New on
12
me.
inch.
What's that, sir?
The 20 course of blocks is based on 12-inch blocks.
That'd be a 12-inch also. Now, our standard basements are 13 course. Anytime we exceed that, we bump up to 12-inch block. And we also fill, on every 6 feet on center, we fill those courses of block solid with concrete. It's called rod and coring.
Yeah,
Also
I
adds-
never seen one before.
adds
so.
structural strength, but again, it's, I was asked to come because I could lend hopefully some credibility and some expertise to the situation, and again, we're not saying the house can't be built, it certainly could.
Okay.
But we just feel like it's a better do, it's more doable, structurally, it would look better, it would be more sound, and I understand that people have built within those standard setbacks, that's their prerogative also. I mean, the appeals process or the variance process is in place for a reason, and maybe they didn't exercise their opportunity to even apply for a variance. I don't know that situation, but again, that's why we're here. We just hope that you would consider all the facts and the positives and the negatives and let us move forward with moving the house 9 feet.
Okay, all right, thank you. And you'll have an opportunity at the end to have you get the last word. So we're going to hear from some other folks now, perhaps. I don't know. Okay. All right, I probably should have done that. Okay, please have a seat. I probably should have done the letters at this part, but this is the point at which we can hear from others in favor of granting the variance, and we've already read the letters, but or we have an opportunity for general comment if we don't have anybody here who's wanting to speak in favor. There is? Please do then. And will you state your name and address for the record, please?
My name's Jeff Reisner. I live at 354 Carroll,
Okay.
sort of at a diagonal from this piece of property. You already have a copy of our letter, but I just wanted to be here as some moral support. My wife and I have been living, we're sort of almost old timers on Carroll, and we got to see the Myers home being built right across the street, and how many truckloads and truckloads and truckloads of fill. And then when they finally put the fill in, they started building a rather large rectangular box of concrete block that went up about 20 or 25 courses. And then they brought in, probably 20 10-ton dump trucks of sand to fill up the box. And it was on top of that box that they built the garage. And it took a long time to get that thing done. And it was dusty and it was a mess. And they got the job done. You know, you have enough engineers and enough trucks, you can do almost anything. But I prefer not to have to go through that again for the Thomases to have their home. So that's why we're here, my wife and I, to speak in support of it. And I don't really see how it'd be a problem other than, actually I don't see any problem at all. I'm thinking of it. That's all I had to say. So.
Thank you. You recognize that there's going to be a lot of filling and building and all that kind of stuff, even if they do get this.
Oh, yes.
I mean, it's just the nature of that slope they're building on.
We've lived there now almost 6 years, and I've watched almost every home being constructed out that way. And yeah, some take more fill than others, but the slope that they're on is steep. And I guess the thing to remember is it's like a triangle, and the farther out you bring one of the bases, the area increases geometrically, but of course the volume is increasing by the cube. So the farther out it goes from the road, the bigger the triangle or the volume increases. Mm-hmm. And of course, inversely, if it's closer to the road, the less that you need. In the end, the thing that's probably the most distracting about the homes that had to go the full 25 feet back is that when you are behind the house, it looks like a very large wall. It doesn't even look like a home at all. They're just flat on the back, and in some cases you can put a deck out on it, but it looks rather odd compared to the other homes. That in itself is not necessarily a detriment, but
maybe to the rear neighbors.
yeah, it could be. You know, fortunately, we're on the front, so we get to look at it. Yeah. So anything that's got a nice front view, we're all in favor of. Okay. I think that's about all I had to say.
Okay, thank you very much. Is there anyone else here this evening to speak in favor? Okay, and then you'd like to speak either in...
My name is Joseph Richard Sligo, and I drove out there today and looked at the property. I live at 102 North Lancaster Street, and I have an interest in what happens in every square foot of Athens City. Now, the 4 letters that came in, may I approach the table to see the addresses of the letters? Because it may have something to do with what I say.
They're all around. They're not just on the same street. They're the ones on the side and the ones in the back looking at them.
There's one from
Here's one from Warwick.
I know where that is.
And this
That's
is one from
one of the neighbors.
They're all the neighbors. They're all from neighbors.
All around.
I know where that is too.
Here's another one.
Yeah, I found that. I drove all the way down to the barn.
15.
15 Warwick.
Now they're
Those are
down on that other street.
right.
Okay.
And this is the one across the street. 28.
Where's
No.
this person?
This is
Oh, I
two,
read this letter. I have a
three,
copy of that letter.
Okay.
The part that I want to comment on, I shall try to be as brief as I can. Let me see the picture.
There's 2 of them there.
Okay, I got it. I also took 2 pictures. I always take Polaroid. Somebody told me I should get a digital. I haven't quite advanced that much. Now, let me comment. I do not know, I can't tell because it was dusk. I think, are you the two people that helped me find the place over here, this Mr. Reiser? Okay, there was a man and a woman walking, and I had a map and they showed me, and I thought maybe you were the ones. I was going to thank you. I was going to say they were very courteous to try to help me. She looked at the map and... Okay. Now, the only concern I have is the pictures I took were for my benefit mostly. I took a picture of the house that had the letter that objected across the street. The gentleman had said, I don't know the man, by the way. These people are strangers to me.
You share the pictures with us?
I took a picture of the front. I stood on the sidewalk where the hill is, and then I took another picture looking into the distance around the curve. There was a post over here. This helps me get oriented. Now, I listened carefully to the comments about moving back and forth and so on. These are technical questions. When I look at a piece of property, and I have looked at many, when I served on the Board of Zoning Appeals, I listened to approximately 100 cases. They weren't all like this. But over the years, I listened to many cases. Some had nothing to do with housing and so on. I always would go out and look and do my homework, and I would say to myself, suppose I was from outside of Athens, and somebody drove me up to this property and said, what do you think you can do with it? And I'd look at it and I'd say, well, this, that. Well, no, there's a condition. You're going to have to build a place on it. It's going to be buildable. It's buildable. It meets the requirements for within the city limits and all that, so fine. Now, the thing that I tried to visualize with these drawings that Mr. Pearson draws up a file for me so that I can do my homework, which I do before I come. I tried to figure out if that particular house, the way it was placed, would be the high point in front of this house across the street. And the house across the street is elevated. Now, I didn't bother walking up the driveway, but I tried to imagine. There was a statement made by the builder, Mr. Morrison, I believe, in reference to this letter that from across the street about where the garage would be. Well, now that I have seen this diagram and I've read enough of those letters to know, and I've heard part of it, I would only have concern about one thing when I got finished looking at this case. Now, I don't vote. I don't have that much influence to the board. The board doesn't pay attention to me. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. The only thing that caught my eye in the letter was the paragraph next to the last one, and I want to refer to it, because it is an issue that occurs every place. I happen to live in Arizona for part of the year, and I'm quite aware of this part. And it is, furthermore, Carroll Road is quite narrow road, and with their house being only 16 feet from the road, I will not be able to fully enjoy my house. Now, that's an opinion, okay? But here's the part. I fear that may also have a negative impact on the real property value should I need to sell my house. Now, that is the kind of thing that's very difficult to get real estate agents to make a statement about. Sometimes it does make a difference and sometimes it doesn't. I am sure the board, in all of its wisdom, will take that into account, and I just draw your attention to it. Other than that, this looks to me like a usable site, and the builder explained why when the chairperson asked about moving it back and doing this, it has to do with the grading. I am in favor of this. I hope the board uses its good judgment. And if they have to put any conditions on the variance, they can, but I don't see anything to suggest.
May we see your photographs, Mr. Sligo?
Sure.
We do pay attention.
You can have them if you want.
Okay. We'll put them in the file. Thank you. Okay. This is the house
I still
directly
take
across.
Polaroid. Thank you very much
Thank you.
for your patience, listening.
Is that supposed to be the one directly across the street? These are direct, this is the one directly across the street, the brick one?
The one with the letter, the brick one, yes, that's,
Yes.
what I did is I went over near that post and I took the picture to the house that was there. And I checked the address very carefully. And that's the house the man wrote the letter that had about the property value. To my knowledge, I didn't make a mistake on that. The other house is the one when you look at a distance
Yeah.
across the street from this house, but this way. So I know exactly where I stood, and there's a slight curve there, and there's a
Yeah.
post there. There was like a triangular set of posts, and there's a fire plug around there too.
There's a fire plug right in front of the property.
Thank you
Yeah.
very much, I appreciate it.
Thank you. All right, we've heard from the appellant and Mr. Sligo is speaking in favor. Is there anyone else to speak in general comment or against the variance? No. Do you have something further? Thanks, Steve.
As I mentioned, I went out there and did a site review based on the concern from the property owner across the street. And our conversation, it's not actually stated in the letter, but the conversation was, could you actually park a car in the driveway and not block the sidewalk? In reference to Carroll Road being a very narrow road, I'd say to the contrary. It's 24 feet of pavement plus curb and gutter. There's a California type rolled curb. So actually face to face of the curb line is 26 feet in width of pavement. So I know a lot of people in town wish they had 26 feet of pavement
Nice.
in front of their house. If anything, I'd say that's a wide street rather
Yeah.
than a narrow street.
Yeah.
The property is located mid-block. It's not on a corner. It's not at the corner of Warwick and Carroll. It's not at the corner of Dove and Carroll. It's mid-block. So if you're thinking about line of sight problems.
Yeah.
I think there was a reference in the letter to less than 15 meters. I probably wasn't in class that day in high school when you did conversion tables, but I think
Less than 5 meters.
Less than 5 meters.
You got 15 feet out of that, is I think is what you.
so. I think a meter's a little more.
Yeah.
So, but like I say, I went out and measured everything. 16 feet plus 4 feet of right of way. There'll be 20 feet from the face of the garage
Yeah.
to the edge of the sidewalk,
Long car.
and where there would be no blocking of the sidewalk for pedestrian traffic.
There was, in one of these letters, there was a reference made to the Murphy's house on Warwick Lane. I guess that was 5 Warwick. I'm not familiar with that, but they had a variance. Do you have any recollection of what that was about? That permitted them to be
That's
closer to
that
the
house
road?
Tony Farron.
That's the one Tony Farian built and came in after the fact and asked for variance.
Oh, okay. I
He didn't
understand.
realize
Yeah,
where the
right.
property
I remember
line.
that
He
one.
measured from the curb
Right, I
instead of from
remember
the
that one.
property
Okay,
line.
I just wanted to ask what that was about, so.
And the property that Mr. Reisner was referring to, Mr. Farian also built that house, and he learned his lesson on the variance at 5 Warwick, and that's why there was so much additional activity in fill that had to take place for that house right across the street, because Mr. Farian knew that, you know,
Yeah, what had to
was-
happen?
And he
his
built
dispensation was for one time.
on the house
on
right
actually
next
making a
door to the
measurement
property in
mistake.
question.
Right.
Tony built that, and he built it according to
According
code
to
on
code,
the
right?
same.
Right.
Right. There
Okay.
were, I had to go out there a couple times because of all the fill, and there were some structural problems that happened based on lack of compaction. While those things were corrected, but any time that you're building on fill, you have to have proper compaction. You can't just drop it there and start building on it. And high walls, I was glad to hear that they didn't have a blowout of a back wall because the garage was on the front rather than on the back. I used to be a superintendent for Ryan Homes, and I had a house on a cul-de-sac one time. It was about 25 courses. The garage was clear on the back. The company didn't authorize poured concrete or rebar-filled cores, and we blew the back wall of that house out twice and sent truckloads of gravel down an embankment. That's just a personal
What a
experience. But
neighborly thing to do.
yeah, I mean, the last truckload of gravel we dropped in there went the wall.
So you attributed that to a lack of structural strength
Right.
there in the walls?
Right, and it was just with 8-inch
Yeah,
block
okay.
laid up, not poured concrete. not reinforced, core-filled
Well,
block.
but as everyone here, or several people here have said, it is possible to engineer these things so that they will be sound and not have those kinds of problems. It's a matter, however, engineering them and following out correctly. Is that your experience?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
So I just wanted to point out, a couple other examples and experiences too.
Yeah.
It is difficult to meet a certain setback, but there are also ways, structural ways, engineered ways to overcome those problems.
Okay.
I just kind of want to present both sides of that.
Thank you. Well, thanks.
And then, Mr. Golsey, did you say you had another question earlier?
No.
Okay. All right, that's all I've got.
Thank you.
Thank you, Steve.
Right, well, I think we've had all the commentary from the floor that we're going to have, and if you have any final words you'd like to share, this is your opportunity. Otherwise, at this point, we close the comments from the floor and start to do our deliberations. Okay, thank you, all right. All right, then. Is there any discussion, or shall we do it as we go through the findings?
I just want to make a quick comment. Yeah, they said that the property was not developed for a long time by many people. They haven't done it for the same reason, I mean, it's difficult to develop this property,
Right.
and that's why it wasn't developed. But granting the variance probably would make it unfair to those people who didn't develop it. And we also denied the case on the same street. And when the builder said he was a professional builder, in his opinion, it was not unbuildable and wasn't buildable. And when we denied it, he found a way to do it, and it came real nice, and sits back where it was supposed to be. So
Looks real nice.
yeah, it does. So and the builder, believes that is doable.
Yeah.
And I think it's going to be a lot more work, more expenses, but that's what we're not concerned about.
Yeah, well, sometimes figuring out the answer to problems makes for a more interesting solution in the long run, but anyway, and sometimes it doesn't. That isn't for us to decide in any case. We do have our 6 findings that we need to go through, and, once I find them.
First, huh?
Yeah, who would like to make that motion?
Well, maybe I'll try.
Okay.
I move to grant a variance to the property 351 Carroll Road, Zone R1, Case 0626V, from Section 2311, Table A, Schedule of Wall Controls to permit construction of a single-family dwelling with a front yard setback of 16 feet, where 25 feet is the required minimum.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, all right. Then, to grant a variance, the first thing we need to consider is the practical difficulty or undue hardship. I would find it difficult to consider a property with a greater practical difficulty than, well, there may be some, but this is a fairly obvious case of a practical difficulty. But is it an undue hardship caused by exceptional conditions pertaining to this specific piece of property? I think you've already said that you feel that there were conditions similar right down the street that were dealt with by.
Well, if the hardship is just if you want to bring more dirt and fill up the thing, there wouldn't be any hardship. Right?
Mhm. It isn't going to be easy to build on that property.
No, it's not easy, no, but it's doable.
Okay, so you feel that it's not undue.
Correct.
All right. Are the circumstances of the property exceptional, or the conditions that apply to it, do they not in general apply to properties in the same district?
Got a lot of lots like that.
Say again?
We have several building sites that share
That
that
are similar?
Yes.
issue.
Or is there anybody feels differently about that?
No, I agree with
Okay.
Roger.
On the preservation of property rights, would literally interpreting the code deprive the appellant of rights commonly enjoyed by others in the same vicinity?
No,
Would granting the variance convey a special privilege?
More so yes than no, I believe.
On the minimum variance, is this the minimum that's required to make reasonable use of the property?
No, we feel it should be able to meet the code variance.
It is fairly minimal. It's, well, actually, it's a third of the distance required setback. I think it's approximately a third anyway. So I suppose it's not so minimal, but it didn't seem a lot of difference to me. However, the other three, I agree with everybody.
Well, that's the point. You know, if there's not enough difference, that's the point, just to maybe set it back. If it's not that much difference.
Okay. Would granting the variance be a substantial detriment to adjacent properties? We've had testimony from several people in the neighborhood that they feel it would not. And one person who feels that it would be.
Well, someone must feel it would be, or we wouldn't have a regulation and a rule that encourages people to line their homes up a minimum amount away from the curb.
Yeah, I've often wondered about that one, but I have a sort of an eccentric way of looking at
You
things.
could have
So,
one house on the curb and the other house 100 foot back and the next house 50 foot back.
I think variety is
It's called a
interesting.
motley.
Yeah, okay. I live in a motley neighborhood. All right. I grant you that in general, in a development like that, it is considered to be an advantage to have all the houses all lined up. Makes trick-or-treating easier. Not of a general nature. Would the variance that they seek be something general or recurring, such that the situation would be more reasonably handled by changing the law? And I would say that this is
This is the last
definitely,
law.
that one is one we can find. There is nothing general or recurring about this. Well, maybe it is. Is this something that would, if you were going to change this, would you think that a change in the law would be the appropriate thing to do?
No.
No, okay. All right. Then are we ready to take a vote?
No.
Okay, let's see. And
No.
I too will vote no, because I think it is possible, and it would be it would be too much of an exceptional privilege for the one house there. I recognize that it is going to be difficult.
Did you get his vote?
And I'm so sorry, I skipped you.
Sorry.
And you do vote today. I forgot, I was thinking, oh, I looked at you and then I thought you were the alternate, but tonight you're not an alternate, and I apologize profusely. Okay, and how do you vote? You vote yes. Okay, and so you have one vote in favor, but you do not, I'm afraid, get the variance, even though it would be a lot easier and a lot less expensive. It'll be a nice neighborhood to live in when you've got it done anyway. So, if you'd like to contest it in any way, you need to, when you get your letter from the Code Enforcement Office, you need to do it within 30 days. All right. The next one would be for 20. 4 to 1. Yep. The next one would be case number 0627V for 20 Graham Drive. Appellant is requesting a variance to prevent construction of a fence, which would have 0 setback on one side and 4 feet setback on another, where 12.5 and 25 feet are the permitted minimums. And Steve, can you tell us the specifics of this recusal?
Yeah, 20 Graham Drive is a property that's located on the northwest corner of Graham and Jacobs. The house is elevated essentially, especially from Jacobs. The land slopes up to the house. I added sections in the packet I gave you, I believe, about the setback requirements. This is similar to the case that was just heard a meeting or two ago at the corner of Morris and Campbell, where when you have a corner lot, you have 2 setbacks. That subdivision was platted before 1960, before the original zoning code. So on the off-street or on the non-front side, that'd be Jacobs, that's the side of the house, you have to be set back 12.5 feet from the property line with a fence. In the front, you have to be back at least 25 feet, or I guess with Jacobs is the off-street, Graham is the on-street, or the front street, on the corner. Always when we're looking at places on a corner, they are somewhat limited in the area they're allowed to fence in or develop because they have two fronts where other properties only have one front. So they lose quite a bit of their property to the setback requirements being on a corner. Included in the packet is a drawing that I came up with based on a drawing that Mr. Moulton had given me, and then we talked about where he wanted to locate the fence, and that's how that drawing came up. So the part of the fence that you see along Jacobs is right on the property line. The request is to put on two sides fence right on the property line also. That is permitted as long as the fence isn't over 6 feet in height. And I believe this is a request for a fence all the way around 6 feet tall. On the front side, or on the Graham side, there's a 4-foot setback request rather than being right on the property line or right on the right-of-way line, back 4 feet. There is, from the back side of the sidewalk toward the property, there's 6 feet of grass area that's actually in the street right-of-way. Graham has a 40-foot wide right-of-way. And the pavement, as I recall, I don't know exactly what it was. It was around 22 feet, I believe. What I did was measured the width of the pavement of the street, deducted that from the 40-foot right-of-way, then divided by 2, making the assumption that the street was centered in the right-of-way. If that be the case, from the back side of the sidewalk toward the property or toward the front of the house, there's 6 feet of right-of-way. The request is 4 feet back from that, so 10 feet back from the edge of the sidewalk. The one thing that I noticed in particular, there's a large, looks like probably, it's a conifer type tree. It's probably a Norway spruce or something like that. It's on the uphill or the north side of the lot facing Graham. The fence will essentially be right at where that tree stops branching out. That's 10 feet back. So the fence will be right, that tree will be included inside the fenced area rather than outside the fenced area, just to give you a frame of reference if you had a chance to go out there and look at it. The same thing is the case. There's some trees on the Jacobs side of the street that the appellant would prefer to fence into the backyard rather than have on the outside of the fenced-in area. It's kind of an unusual property. It's 3 different parcels, and it looks like it probably was not part of either one of the subdivisions in that area. It was some kind of a residual parcel, it looks like, and that's why it's a little more oddly shaped than the rest of the properties in that neighborhood. It's essentially very wide, but not very deep.
That's not all that shallow. Doesn't this show it at 105?
Right.
That's not,
That's big.
that's big.
What I'm saying is the length of it. It's a,
160.
it's not,
It's 165.
it's a lot, the lot has a lot of side yard that other houses don't have in the
And a lot of
area.
front yard, too.
And because it's on a corner, you know, the backyard area is somewhat limited. I guess that's what I meant to say. What would be their backyard is essentially their side yard. And they have a lot of it.
Well, okay. It looks like a pretty good sized yard. It's a nice yard. Really nice.
The appellant's arguments were also contained in the file
Yeah.
as to why they thought the variance should be granted. Another reason that I went out, and this is similar to the other case, I wanted to make sure that the fence would not cause any detriment to adjacent properties pulling out of the driveway, say the next property north where there's a driveway there. Right now, as you back out of that driveway, you're looking at that tree as you're backing out, and there was a clump of pampas grass or something else growing there even closer to the street. So I don't know, trees are permitted out in the right-of-way, fences aren't. So just an observation about line of sight for backing out of adjacent property. And again, there would be from the street to the, actually from the pavement to where the fence would be in the neighbor's driveway would be about 4 feet of grass sidewalk, 9, about 15 feet from the curb line up to the fence. 15, 16 feet.
I've got a question for your Graham Drive and Jacobs Drive. No, I'm taking the question back before I even ask it. I was going to ask if there'd be any line of sight problems from the proposed location of the fence there on Jacobs Drive. But looking at it, I don't see that there would be any problem.
As I mentioned, on that side, on the Jacobs side, there's quite a slope
Yeah.
to get up to the house.
Yeah,
If you went out,
no problem.
you've got to look at the area, it does slope up.
Yeah.
So there's, it's well back from the edge of the pavement, so I don't see any line of sight problems there either.
Okay, well, does anybody have any questions for Steve before he starts away?
And just another explanation, the reason that's advertised is 2 different setback variances. There's 2 different requirements, one for the off-street, one for the on-street.
Okay. Okay, thank you. If you would like to have the floor, the general comment part would be where it would be appropriate. But because now we're going to take the comments from our petitioners. And if you'll state your name and address for the record, please.
My name is Michael Moulton. I live at 20 Graham Drive. This is my wife.
And Lisa Moulton.
She lives there too.
I'm so glad.
Handy. Handy.
Yeah, it works out well. I believe that would it be of value to the members of the board to read the letter requesting? I'm seeing some head nodding there, so we'll go ahead and do that. Description or nature of the variance requested. We desire to build a fence around the back and side yards. Because this is a corner lot, we cannot meet the setback requirements of the city code. The 6-foot safety/privacy fence would be built 4 feet from the curb on Graham Drive and on the right-of-way line on Jacob Street, which is approximately 11.5 feet from the edge of the road, extending from the southeast corner of the house. Due to where the house is situated on the lot, the side yard is larger than the backyard. A portion of the backyard will soon be occupied by a much-needed addition to the home. The bulk of usable yard space for our children and dogs to safely play is and will continue to be located directly north of the house along Graham Drive. A large pine tree, which is a Colorado blue spruce, I believe, is located near the northeast corner of the property, and the variance would enable the safe inclusion of it with the rest of the yard while leaving 4 feet of green space between the fence and the curb. Along Jacob Street, there is a row of evergreen trees on our property that we wish to keep within the yard. This would leave approximately 11.5 feet of green space. The fence will not impair the supply of light or air to the adjacent properties or adversely affect them in any way, since the variance requested is for the portion of the fence bordering Graham and Jacobs. The variance will not be injurious to the area or detrimental to public welfare, but will serve to contain and protect our young children, visiting children, and any pets that inhabit the property. This includes a mentally and physically handicapped child who, in the absence of a substantially large area in which to safely play, wanders into the street. Keeping our children and pets on our property so they are not a nuisance to neighbors or a hazard in the roadways will ultimately be of benefit to the neighborhood. Finally, there are two other corner lot properties in the immediate vicinity, at the corner of Strathmore and Jacobs. They clearly do not meet the setback requirements for their fences. These fences are not a detriment to the neighborhood and would appear appropriate for corner lots. So, to address a couple issues here that I wanted to clarify. The map that we provided of the property may be a little bit deceiving to, not deceiving, it's not the right word, confusing to anyone looking at the map and not knowing if all the parameters. While drawing the map, I should have put, if you look at the line that represents the right-of-way on Graham Drive as well as the right-of-way on Jacobs Drive, Jacobs Drive. While looking at the line, that line represents the right-of-way, which is 40 feet wide or 20 feet from the center of the road. It does not represent where currently the edge of the curb is. So one may look at this and feel, uh-oh, there's going to be a fence right on the property, right on the pavement. That's not the case at all. As Steve Pearson has pointed out, this line represents, and what I should have done while creating this map or this plan of the property, I should have also included a line down here somewhere which would have been 11 and a half feet, I believe, excuse me, 13, I believe it's 13 and a half feet from the middle of the road to the edge of the pavement, 13 and a half feet, so that the right-of-way starts approximately 7 feet back from the edge of the pavement. So we're looking for the fence to be back beyond that property. So there's much more green space there than probably is shown by the property, by the map.
I have.
Yes.
Oh, go ahead.
Okay.
Finish up what you're saying.
Do you have a question about that?
No, just go ahead with what you're saying, then I'll say what I wanted to ask you.
So again, just summarize what I just said, that the right-of-way line here does not represent the edge of the pavement.
Okay.
And on Jacob Street, that right-of-way line is probably 11 and a half feet back from the edge of the pavement. So.
Okay, so you're saying that where you've drawn the fence.
Correct.
Is actually set back from,
Yeah.
substantially set back from the edge of the
Yeah,
pavement.
so for instance, on Jacobs Drive, I believe you're pointing there, looks like you're pointing there. On Jacobs Drive, where that fence is, that line, which represents right away where the fence would be, is about 11 and a half feet from the edge of the pavement.
Okay, good.
So there's plenty of green space there. Yes.
Would you require any variance in the future for the addition, or have you discussed this with the code office?
We do not need, we have discussed it extensively. I do not require any variance at all. And already have a building permit secured.
Oh, okay.
And just so you know, the addition's basically back behind the house.
Right.
Okay, I have a question for you regarding your decisions about the position of the fence in the part of the yard facing on Graham Drive. And you should be aware that I'm saying this as one who is in favor of fences and wished that the current law were different, because I would like to have fences that are different in my yard too. I would like to be able to put them forward of the house. But the code states fairly clearly that they not be, and I recognize that you're telling us the reasons why you think you should have a variance from the code. That's what you're here for. But one of the things we have to find is for whether it's the minimal amount required for reasonable use of the property. And again, you know, I understand that using as much of your property as possible to me is reasonable, and I am in favor of fences. And I would want to do the same thing you're doing here. But what I'm going to have a problem with later on is finding it minimal when you could line up your fence with the garage and still be enclosing a very large area anyway. Right. You'd be just leaving that, you'd just be having it straight across the front the way, you know, the code is set up. Right. And you would still, I would be able to find, I think probably without any trouble, for the setback on the fence for the Jacobs Drive. But I can't see where we would be able to find. Can you explain to me how it's going to be minimal or necessary?
Sure. Yeah. That particular, to address that question specifically, there is a large Colorado blue spruce.
Oh yeah, I saw that tree. It's a beautiful tree.
Yeah, it's a pretty tree.
It'd be nice to have it inside the yard, but
that is correct.
But that, yeah. But
so the normal average home, I guess, would have a backyard for which children to play. The way our house sits on the property, our quote-unquote backyard would actually, in fact, be the side yard.
Side yard, right.
The house, I don't know if this is relevant or germane at all to this discussion, but I'll just comment on this. We spent about a year and a half looking for a home, actively looking at, I don't know how many, probably close to 100 different houses. I feel like I have a very good feel for the property values in the Athens area, and particularly what's referred to as the Near East Side in this neighborhood, were the two neighborhoods we were most interested in. In my opinion, the house was overpriced dramatically based on the home and the property, unless you include the fact that it has this big yard. So essentially what we bought was what would be equivalent of 3 lots. We did, in fact, buy 3 lots. And the reason we paid what would be potentially a premium price, or again, that's a matter of opinion, but what might be considered a premium price, the reason we paid that was in order to have a large yard for our 4 children to play in. Now, if I may address quickly the 4 children. We do have 4 kids, ages 9.5, 7, 3.5, and 1. He's just starting to walk and toddle and has managed to toddle into the street. But most specifically, I'd like to address our oldest child, Gabby. She's 9.5 years old. She's a special needs child, both mentally and physically handicapped. She has lots of needs, lots of developmental needs. And one of the things that's very therapeutic and beneficial to her is to be able to be outside and to play. She tends to wander, and if we don't keep an eye on her at all times, she will wander a long ways away. So having a large yard in which to play is one of the reasons we moved to that particular home in that neighborhood. We love the neighborhood. We think it's a great neighborhood in so many different ways. Great location, great neighbors. So we're real excited to be in that neighborhood. We just would like to have a larger yard for our child to play in. So we look at it, particularly in this case, I'm looking at that, it's a matter of safety for our children to play in. So.
I have a question.
Sure.
The third paragraph in the letter that you wrote to us. Because this is a corner lot, we cannot meet setback requirements. I don't understand. You could meet setback requirements whether it's a corner lot or not, couldn't you?
Yes, we
That's the point I'm trying to make. You're saying that it isn't possible to meet setback
It clearly is
requirements.
possible. It's clearly possible because we don't have to have a fence, period.
Exactly, but you could have a fence and you could meet the setback requirements.
That is correct. We could.
So the third paragraph's misleading.
Would you not agree that we could have a fence? We could set back a point.
Yes, we wouldn't be able to fully enjoy the property.
Oh,
or to,
okay, well, that's a different issue.
I think that also, may I continue? Or do you have another question?
I have another question. And there again, you're remarking about the absence of a substantially large area as opposed to a large area.
I think large is relative, and so when one might look at that and say, this is a large area, well, someone else who's, let's say, moving from an 8-acre lot, piece of property might say, this is a small area. So
just so you know, we moved from 8 acres and our house was the setback on our house, not by ordinance, but our setback was
Compared to 8 acres, it wouldn't be a
550
substantial
feet.
amount either, would it?
Yeah.
And then-
it's the trees and inclusion, safe inclusion of the trees in the property is also key. Also, I believe, to the property's value. What we're doing to the house with the addition does raise the value of the properties in the neighborhood. And so because of that, then we are now needing more of our side yard space. And so therefore, that's why we're requesting this variance, which, like we stated, there is a precedence for this type of fence in the neighborhood.
I understand. I sympathize with you. I just couldn't understand how you could make the statement that because this is a corner lot, we cannot meet the setback.
Perhaps the language was not
Yeah.
accurate there.
Because of the corner lot, you have problems with the fences. It is a problem with the fence in a corner lot, so.
I'm sorry, may I just, what Lisa was saying, when we moved to the neighborhood, we've actually had quite a few neighbors, people in not just the immediate neighbors, the general vicinity that's a neighborhood where lots of people walk around the block, and we see lots of neighbors from several blocks over who walk and stop and say hi. I've been struck by how many neighbors have made comments to us that they're very happy that we're moving in and trying to upgrade, not trying, we're making an attempt to increase the value of the property and make it a nicer place. Not that it was a nice place before, it's a great neighborhood, we wouldn't have bought it if it was a nice place, but it was a fairly plain, simple house, simple architecture, and fairly plain landscape also, just essentially just grass. And our intention is to build a nice addition that will absolutely increase the value of the home. Our also intention is we have lots of plans, excuse me, lots of plans for landscaping and to make the property nice. So when I look at the fence and the overall property value, I look at the ability to segment property and to create landscape environment in front of the fence to make it a nicer home.
So you think a 6-foot fence is going to enhance the appearance of the property?
Well, it will when there are shrubs and flowers and trees in front of it.
For me, there are people who feel that it does, and I'm a fence person. I still do have a problem with that front fence, though. I wanted to ask you if you are absolutely wedded to that front fence, if it's the front fence and in that position or nothing, or if you would be willing to consider, no, that's for you to decide later.
So actually, I was going to ask the same question.
I was going to suggest that we do the variance, since it's two separate.
Yeah, would they be acceptable to you guys to go along with the suggestion that she made to go a straight line? Would that be acceptable if that was a decision for us to make?
Well, I think in light of the fact that that's the law or city ordinance, I don't know exact terminology, that would be. Should we be denied?
That would be your default. That would be your default.
That's what we would have to do.
Well,
and the sad thing for us, and I believe for the property values in general in the neighborhood, is by so doing, we're keeping that big tree outside the fence, creating a segmented, smaller backyard. I know at some point we'll probably resell, and people will go and look at the property and go, boy, it's too bad there's not a bigger yard. Why did they build the fence there? It'd be nice to have that big, nice
as
yard.
the law says to, that's why.
So I'm looking at increasing the property values too.
Okay, I understand. Yeah. Okay. Did anybody else have any questions?
I guess what we just want to do is to bring it up as far as we can to the pine tree line, so that it's not an arbitrary place that we're wanting to put the fence. It's because of this tree that has a very large diameter.
And I believe, sorry to interrupt, I think Steve Pearson pointed out, and I can't remember the exact measurement, I did measure it, but I believe it's maybe 10 or 11 feet from the curb.
Or 10 feet back from the backside of the sidewalk.
Okay.
From where the sidewalk would be, if there were one. Yes. Yeah, right. Okay. Okay.
10 feet back from the curb.
Yeah.
Not from the sidewalk.
From where the right of way is, where the sidewalk would be if there were a sidewalk.
What confuses me is that we wind up talking about curbs and sidewalks when the code concerns itself with property lines and not curbs and sidewalks.
Well, because you don't see property lines, you see curbs and sidewalks.
Yeah.
So the
I think so. The code, the
reference.
code ought to remark about curbs and sidewalks instead of property lines. Is that what you're saying?
It's human nature to refer to the visual cues.
Mr. Cruiser, I believe the reason I brought that up, why I believe it to be, you are Mr. Cruiser, correct?
Yes, sir.
I believe the reason I brought that up is because I believe, looking at the map, people may be concerned that the fence is going to be right on the street, right on the road. And I just wanted to point out that it's really not on the road. It's set back quite a ways from what would be considered the pavement or the road.
Yeah, that's what you said in the beginning.
10 feet from the edge, yeah.
Okay. Anything else? Anybody? Nope. Then thank you very much, and you will have an opportunity at the very end to say anything else that may have occurred to you when other people come up to speak.
Okay,
Thanks.
thank you.
Is there anyone here to speak in favor of granting this variance? Or anyone to speak in general comment about the granting of the variance? Okay, Mr. Sligo?
I'm Joseph Richard Sligo. I live at 102 North Lancaster Street. And the thing that struck me about this was the fact that as you look at the existing house, the front of it, was that big chunk of the fence that is like 20 feet by, let's see, if one square is 5 feet, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. That's 65 feet, I think, isn't that right? Did I measure right?
Yes, sir, you're correct.
And I wondered why you need that extra piece in there. Because when you come up Graham, you would be seeing a 6-foot fence coming out from the house. Now, I'm familiar with the code enough to know that when they designed it, you can't put a 6-foot fence in your front yard,
I think it's 65, I think it's 20.
but could you put a 4-foot fence in your front yard
Yes.
that was closed? Without
Not-
a variance?
No, you can't put a 4-foot fence there. You can only put it lined up with the house, or,
Right, you still couldn't put a fence in those areas that I'm talking about, correct?
Correct.
And I think the board has to seriously consider, granted the assumption that the addition improves and all that, and I see no problem on Jacob Street, because that Jacob Drive is, there's nothing there but trees. There are no sidewalks there, are there? On that side? No, there are no sidewalks. No. The point is, I would urge the board to consider why you have to have that much fence. There may be very good reasons, which the board can find out by questioning the applicants, but that would seem to me it would be too far out of line. I know you try to maximize a yard when you've got it, and it is a hangover from 3 lots. Maybe Mr. Pearson can speak about that. That's the only concern I have, plus the fact that you have a 6-foot fence all around the property. Apparently in that part of town, that would not be a problem, but I don't know very many 6-foot fences out there. I know they're open. They're like wire fences that you can see through, which some people don't like. So I just would urge the board to give careful consideration if you grant that. And I also want to say something else. If the board feels that the variance should be granted for the 6-foot fence where they decide in their wisdom it ought to be, as a board, you are allowed to put in conditions that when the property is sold, the fence has to come down.
well, yeah, but if we
You
determine that
can-
the
you
fence
can
is
do that.
appropriate, I don't see why we would do that.
Well, you might want to do that because they have special needs for their children to have protection on the fence. They spoke of the daughter, for example, whereas you might not need that
Well, I guess the new owner can always make a decision
yeah, the
whether he
new
wants
owner
to
can
have
always
it.
take down
the fence. I'm just saying.
Take it down.
You may not like it, but I think you are allowed to do that.
Okay.
That's all.
Well,
Thank you
that's
very
good.
much.
Yeah, thank you for the reminder. I wouldn't have thought of that. All right, is there anyone else present who'd like to speak in general comment? This is general comment? Or are you speaking in favor? General, okay.
Well, I don't know if I'm speaking in favor or not. I don't know anything about this, actually. But,
My name is Melinda
That's
Miller, and I've just moved to Graham Drive myself in February, and I live at 25 Graham Drive. So my property is really the second, actually it's the third house from the corner on the right, but the first house on the corner it is not a Graham address. So I don't know if I'm in favor or not of this. I just received this in the mail, and I haven't discussed this with my neighbors, so I was quite surprised. And unlike you, Muriel, I really don't like fences at all. But I do understand.
I like fences.
I know, I said unlike you, I do not like fences.
I got you.
But
Okay,
I
you
do
said
really
do like
understand the
fences.
need for fencing here because they do have children and they do have dogs. And I myself built a fence, just a sort of makeshift fence in the back of my property, continuing my neighbor's fences to keep my dog back there. But of course there is the whole question here of, this addition that's being put on. I don't know. I mean, we've not seen anybody breaking ground here, so I presume it will affect our property values, and perhaps the addition could have been put to the north, even back, to the west of the garage and to the north, and using up some of that land as opposed to leaving some of the. But it wasn't, and so it's going back. I was very confused, Steve, about your presentation about this property line and the 4 feet. And I'm still a little confused about it. So what you're saying is actually, first of all, your comments about the slope, if you'll excuse me, I just wanted to correct you a little bit, because I think the slope, the way I look at it when I walk my dog on Graham, is a much steeper slope than from Jacob's. It seems much steeper. So I'm a little wondering what that fence is going to look like, because it is a steep slope coming up from Graham. in that elevation of that house. So I'm a little confused about how much of a setback. So when you're talking about this line on this diagram, it really is the curb, or it really isn't the curb? It's not the curb. It's
11 and a half feet back from the curb.
It's 11 and a half feet back from the curb. And then that fence is proposed another 4 feet back in from the 11 and a half feet of the curb, right? No, 6 feet more, 4 feet more. Okay, that's very confusing. Anyway, so that's still a little confusing to me. I understand the need for fencing with children and dogs, and so I do understand that. 6 feet just seems awfully high. I guess my question is, it's really, I think to say there's no adverse effect on the properties, I'd have to deny that maybe, because I don't know that there's an adverse effect. I bought my house in hopes that maybe it would be a good investment for me, and I don't see any other fences up and down Graham Drive. Now, that doesn't mean that I wouldn't agree to a fence here around this property, but I think that the fence definitely could affect my property value. Let's be very clear about that, particularly a 6-foot fence. Depends on what materials we're talking about. Are we talking about a fence that we can see through? Are we talking about chain link? Are we talking about a wooden fence? I have no idea what kind of fencing we're talking about here, but 6 feet is pretty high, particularly given the elevation of the slope up this. So it is a concern to me.
I don't think they're asking for any kind of variance for the height. I think the height is not anything that is an issue here, because 6 foot is an accepted, it is maybe the maximum, but it is the accepted height of a standard fence. That's the height they usually are. So the height of the fence is not an issue here. It's the location of the fence.
Okay, but I think for some of us in the neighborhood, it might be an issue about the height of the fence. Are you saying then, irregardless of their variance, that the city would not allow, I guess I didn't understand this gentleman's, you wouldn't allow a variance with a lesser height fence?
No.
I know they're not asking for that.
Yeah, the question of the fence is not an issue, and we wouldn't determine the height of the fence in any case. That's for them to decide, as long as they don't exceed 6 feet, because 6 feet is what they're permitted by law. What they're not permitted is to build a fence beyond a certain setback area, and that's what they've come to address here.
Right. Okay. So I just wanted to get, so that's not a city issue. That's something.
Yeah. That's
a
just
preference for them, whether they build whatever they do. So I think it's rather obtrusive. I don't know. I don't know whether I'm having a problem that it's so far down by the street, but I understand their reasoning for it. I just don't know if that, I think it's, I think it's
feel better
great.
about it if it were not so close to the street? Would it seem less intrusive to you?
I think so, and I personally would like it if it wasn't 6 feet. If it was 4 feet, I think it certainly would contain their dogs and their children. But
well, I just walked past a dog today that was at a 4-foot fence, and I thought it was going to come over the fence at me.
Well, their dogs aren't coming over anything.
No, but if the intention is to contain children and dogs, 4 feet don't do it.
I understand. Well, yes, I guess I would. I mean, I understand certainly their reasoning for putting it down this close to the street. Because they want to maximize the use of that property. I don't know that the pine tree figures into it for me at all, or for the, future sale of that property, really. But I think the fence probably figures into it more than whether the pine tree is included or not, to be honest with you, Mike. But anyway, that's all I have to say. I'd like to.
Thank you. It sounds to me as if you were speaking in opposition. Thank you. Is there anyone else here who's speaking in general comment, or at this point in opposition? Okay.
There's a general comment.
Well, there's a general comment one? I'm so sorry. Okay. We were supposed to be at general comment right now. We'll get to opposition in a moment.
The general procedure.
Okay, yeah. And your name and address?
I'm Al Squibb, live at 22 Jacobs Drive, diagonally across from this property. And I have a couple of concerns, as she has already mentioned, the construction of it. Is it going to be wood, and some of those deteriorate fairly rapidly? Will it be kept up, so forth and so forth like that? But I'm also, along with what you were asking, is why the need of the extra space down there. I did some figuring, and it's based on this and a few extrapolations and so forth. But I have square footage with no variance, and the proposed additions are left out of this too. It's about 8,324 square feet. The square feet with the added addition with the variance would be another 2,237 feet for a total of about 10,561. And I figured out that 2,200, the extra, in other words, just back here on that part and the front would be about 22%. And I'm with you. I don't really see that it's going to make that much difference. And I'm with Milena on this one. That steep goes up there. Those of us probably across the street are going to look over that fence. But I simply would like some answer to that. And I'm just wondering about, with that much yard, why there would need to be a variance. At least on that part. Now, Jacobs, no problem there.
Okay. You have the problem with Graham Drive, but not with the Jacobs fence,
Right.
but with the Graham Drive fence. Thank you. Steve, this is general comment, then we'll get to the...
Yeah, I apologize for the statement about the sidewalk. I'm a visual type person.
Yeah, me too.
And I have about
Me too.
6,500 properties that I have pictures of in my mind. So, sidewalk is quite a bit of detail. But the actual measurement, I went out there and did it this evening. I took, as I explained, I took the street, assuming it was centered in a 40-foot right-of-way, measured the pavement curb to curb, deducted that pavement measurement from 40 feet, assuming the street's centered in the right-of-way, divided that by 2, and then busted out each way. So my recollection was there was 6 feet on each side. That's 12 from 40, well, 30, so there's 20-some feet of pavement there. To the best of my recollection, like I say, that was 6 feet back from the curb. The fence is proposed to be an additional 4 feet back, so that'd be at least 10 feet from the curb line. And it essentially lines up with the front of that spruce tree. And in that neighborhood too, I just have a picture in my mind because Jacobs is basically running along the toe of the slope, and all the streets then take up from there. So I do remember as I went up Graham, it was going up. That may have been a bad assumption that the house, was steeper on the Jacobs side. But there are a lot of houses down there that do have a steep Jacobs side because some of the streets do go up in elevation a lot quicker,
Right, yeah.
a lot faster than some. Some are flatter for a little longer distance.
Well, they may,
Some take off pretty quick, increase in elevation from Jacobs as they head up towards Sells Park.
well, from their own visual, they may decide that they want a shorter fence along the top. It would save money too, but they are not required to take the contour of the land into...
No, fences are measured from the
From the
grade
ground
at the,
up.
yeah. And it wouldn't matter if the fence were 4 feet high, if it was solid wood, if it was vinyl, if it was picket, if it was chain link. No fence of any height, of any type material is permitted in the front yards. Additionally, I probably want to make a clarification too. There is no, in Athens, there are no restrictions about what fences can be constructed of. They can be constructed of wood, used pallets, expensive vinyl, chain link, woven chain link. There are no regulations except for the fact that they can't exceed 6 feet in height or meet the setback requirements. So you can build a fence out of anything you want.
Okay.
There are some subdivisions that have restrictions on chain link fence. They're not permitted. There are some jurisdictions, municipalities, and other political subdivisions that prohibit such things as chain link. But in Athens, there are no regulations. You can build your fence out of anything you want to build it out of.
Okay, thank you.
Freddie would be okay with that in my neighborhood. Just take the front. That's all fine. I think there's a barricade back here.
My name's Robert Handley. I live at 73 Elmwood Place, but I own the property at 24 Graham, which is right adjacent to this property. And I would like to speak on behalf of not accepting this variance. The main reason being, and I'm still confused with Steve and his dimensions about that tree. The tree is in or out of the fence?
The tree would be inside the fence.
Okay.
Sounded like it was going to be right on the line, from what you were saying.
The line of the fence, the inside the tree,
Yeah.
the edge of the tree is very, very close to the line.
I see, okay.
Very close to,
To the right of way line.
where is the fence is the, are
The tree
you?
would be inside of the fence.
Yeah.
Here's the curve right there.
Use a different marker.
In the right of way, there's 4 feet additionally, so there's 10 feet where the fence will be, the curve line. 6 feet of that's right of way, 4 feet is actually on the property. And that tree, the way it's grown is about right there at the base of it. Probably goes,
I see, okay.
so right at the edge of the tree. And it's, you know, I mean, it's wide.
I guess the other,
It's probably-
and the other question is about the other bushes that run along your side of, the north side of your property. Those bushes are going to be on the outside of the fence or the inside of the fence?
Inside, I think, was the plan,
It's
wasn't
being-
it?
It's being surveyed right now, so we don't know exactly where those shrubs line up. I mean, maybe you know, since it's your property. I don't know exactly which side of the property line those shrubs are on.
All right. Well, I'm against it just because of the safety issue with the driveway. Our house sits above his house, and the driveway, coming down the driveway, I'm concerned about the fence impacting vision on the street, for one. Number two, I find it interesting that the purchase price on that property included the house and 2 lots. And there's plenty of property already there to be fenced in without asking for a variance with the children. That's my thoughts. And he's so concerned about increasing the values of the properties with this fence. My personal opinion is that he would impact the values of the properties negatively, but maybe increasing the value on his property. So I'm looking out, and I think it'd be interesting for for Mike and his wife to know some of his neighbors. He spoke that he's had a lot of neighbors speak highly of all this going on and all this, but I think he needs to meet some of the people that are concerned about their property values being impacted negatively, who live real close to you. So.
Could I just be clear which property you're talking about? What is the house that you're?
24 Graham.
That's the one just
North.
next.
Yes.
Along on the same side of the street,
Yes,
just
exactly.
next.
Yeah.
It's the one that's close to the tree.
Very close.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm Pin Sexton. I live at 17 Graham Drive, last 20 years. I've always enjoyed the view going when I come home from work, looking up up Graham. It's green, lots of trees. And I think the proposed fence would dominate this view. It would stick out like a sore thumb. I'm not sure if it's wood, it will deteriorate and look worse over the years. I'm concerned about the effect of my property values, and I know that the ordinances are set up not to protect the owner, it's to protect the people around the owner. And I just think that either variance will reduce my property value. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else wanting to speak?
Good evening. My name is David Fry. I currently reside at 20 Euclid Place, which sits on the corner of Euclid and Jacob, I guess it is. I wasn't close enough to get a letter, but I found about this through some of the other neighbors. I have appeared before the board before in a professional capacity. I'm here simply as an interested citizen this evening. When I come to these meetings, though, I'm always amazed at how much irrelevant chit-chat there is, and how much value judgment is discussed, and whether you like fences or you don't like fences. But to cut to the chase here, and let me say that I have lived in that neighborhood or owned property for 32 years. We raised 3 children and had dogs, didn't have a fence. I remember when that was still a vacant lot. When the property was on the market this summer, someone suggested that I ought to look at it myself because they thought it was a real good value. The price was designed for a quick sale, I'm told. And based upon what I know of the price, the asking price, and the values of the properties in that area, it was a very good price. I simply wasn't interested in a house, another house. But to cut to the chase here, they don't come close to meeting any of the first 4 criteria of the 6 that they have to meet. It isn't an exceptional property. It's just like any other property out there. The fact that they have what they consider to be exceptional means doesn't mean anything. They bought the property knowing what the property was, knowing what their needs were going to be, and the fact that the property doesn't fit their needs is totally irrelevant. And so just to cut to the chase here and try to direct the board to what it has to do and what it always does in all these cases, you consider the 6 criteria and you look at the 6 criteria objectively, without bias. They don't come close to meeting any of the first 4.
May I respond to what you said?
Sure.
When one speaks to somebody who doesn't do this all the time, and you've done it and we've done it, but when you're going to say something negative about their baby, prefacing it with saying, this isn't because you don't like blonde hair, when you say that blonde hair has a problem with it. When I said that I was making the comments that I made, in spite of the fact that I am in favor of fences, I wanted them to understand that my concern was about the situation here and the findings, not about the fact that I just don't like fences.
I understand that the board...
And when we go on and do consider the findings, then we consider each one of the findings in series, in sequence. However, the people who make their presentations don't always speak to the findings because they don't understand how germane they are.
I understand that the board has it's appropriate for the board, if not responsible, to try to make the proponents feel comfortable and guide them along, and to assure the proponents that you're trying to look at this thing in a somewhat sympathetic manner.
Right.
Including my conversation, we've been at this now for 45 minutes.
Right.
And there has
You're
been,
not required to be here.
And there has been no discussion, practically no discussion about the specifics of the criteria. I think Roger has asked a question or two about the specifics, but that's what it really boils down to. And I think if you want to look at it objectively, and if you want to look at it from a standpoint of what your responsibilities and duty as a board, you don't come close to any of the first four criteria.
And this is a part of the hearing that we are hearing everybody, and then based on those hearings we make decisions.
And you know what? We would have loved to have had you on the board when we were trying to get members on the board, but you didn't volunteer.
Fortunately, I was not aware of the opening.
Oh, okay. Well, the very next time there's an opening, we'll have your address, and we'll make sure you get a letter.
Thank you for your consideration.
Okay, thank you. Now then, is there anyone else who'd like to speak? Please do. We have more than one. Is this in general or in opposition? Are you speaking? These, I think, are speaking in opposition. Is that what? Oh. If you had something that you want to share, please.
Did you swear in?
And you swore earlier, right? Yes. Please come up and state your name and your address.
I am Jackie Brown, and I'm hoping to live in the home that belongs to Mr. Handley. My father is planning to purchase the home for me, and so I will be the one living right next door to the fence.
Okay.
So I have a tiny little diagram. I would like, it's not accurate, but it's general. And I was wondering if you would be able to look at it.
We certainly could look at it.
Okay. The idea of this diagram is that, okay, now there is a home there, and there's a fence, and a fence. And now there's a hedge right here, and with a yard. And then this is
the house that you're going to be living in.
Yeah, yeah, hedge all around,
Mm-hmm.
I would feel totally blocked in if there was a fence sticking out
Right.
here, and I would not be able to see anything down south.
Right. It would
south.
interfere with your line of sight.
Plus, the driveway would be a matter of, I don't know, very few feet. I'm thinking 6 feet from the fence or less or something. I'm not sure, maybe less than 4 to 6 feet. When I'm pulling out, the neighborhood, as you know, is inundated with children biking, and I'm concerned that I'm not going to be able to see children riding their bikes or families. It's very popular for people to walk up and down the street, and I'm very worried about having to be able
I can see the problem, and everyone
We're
wants to
helping
see the
you.
drawing. Okay. I'll just explain for the record what this is. That we have a drawing that shows visually how the fence would protrude into the line of sight for the next door neighbor.
And I'm thinking that on this side of the tree is at least a little bit of space where I
Right,
would
you can
be
see
able
out
to get
beyond it. Right.
But on this side of the tree,
Because they
you know,
moved there, they moved it,
I
they
couldn't.
Okay, that's
there.
it's very helpful.
Can we go back here if I have anything else to say?
Yes, sir.
Could you have her repeat her name? I didn't catch it. She said it quickly.
Oh, yes, please.
Brown.
And your current address, Ms. Brown.
It's 707 West Union Street.
Okay.
And
Hoping to
I
move
think
into
that is
24.
mostly everything.
Okay. Anything else?
That's about it.
That was very helpful. Thank you. Can we keep it for the record?
Yeah.
Thanks. All right. Is there, now, I thought there was somebody else?
There's that lady in red.
Do you still want to speak? Well, you do need to come up if you're going to, they can't get you on the camera. You need to get on the camera.
You want to be on TV, don't you?
I'm Claire Squibbin. We live catty corner. My husband just spoke a little bit ago. The one thing, when they mentioned the fence in the neighborhood, was like, well, you would remember, the rest of them are too young probably, Saul Rosenberg's, you know, that big stone. And we've been there 44 years, and that fence was there long before we were there. So that was the two fences, I think, that, and who was the other one? Saul and, I can't think. On Utah, they have these big stone fences,
Mhm, I
and
saw that
they're
one.
very difficult. Now, I know with yours won't come clear out on Jacobs, but those two fences, I mean, I've seen kids hit by bicycles because they don't stop, and the cars are coming because the kids can't see because of the stone fence. So that worries me a lot, that way, of the tall fences. And we have a tall fence, but we didn't get a variance or anything. We went in 25 feet on our side.
Right.
So
You set it back far enough to where it
yeah,
wouldn't be a problem.
and we do have these zoning rules and so forth, and especially for the fronts of the houses, I really feel it would be good to keep them all kind of nice. But those are the only two fences, and this goes back in the late 30s and 40s. So
Okay.
that's all I wanted to correct that about the fencing.
Thank you for the background. Thanks. All right. I think then we may be finished with the comments, but it is the opportunity for the appellant to, the appellants to state. They get the final word.
Thank you. I'd like to preface what I'm saying by, I appreciate our neighbors coming and they're in effect fighting for the neighborhood. And I appreciate that, and that's what we're trying to do too. We're trying to maintain a nice neighborhood. In fact, that's every bit of our intention in moving this neighborhood, and the plans we have for building an addition is to increase the value of our property and the entire neighborhood. I've also been in the business world long enough to know that by increasing the value of my property does in fact increase the property of the value of the adjacent properties. So that is, as a business person, that's my intention, is to bring the values up of the neighborhood.
How do you argue that a fence is going to increase the value of your property?
That's a very good question. I just wanted to clarify that I wasn't trying to destroy the property, the neighborhood.
So for me, it increases the value of the property
How does
because
it
I
increase?
value what the fence, the safety that the fence gives.
Yeah, and I'll address your question too, along with what she just said. When people go to look at homes, they look for different things. Some people like this type of home, that type of home. But we were going to look at homes. The value of a property is increased if we see a large yard. We're not unique in that situation. There are many, many people who would look at a home, going to look at a house, look at the yard and the architecture, and see a nice big yard with trees and landscaping and think, this is a nice home, this is a nice yard. So that's how a larger yard would increase
There
the
was
value.
somebody in here who said that the fence would not appeal to her,
Well-
it would decrease the value.
Well,
But what about this question everybody's been waiting to hear? What kind of a fence?
Yeah, I was just going to address that. Thank you, because I do believe there is some concern about the type of the fence. Our intention, in fact, we went out today and purchased building materials, although we didn't purchase enough, knowing that we might not get the variance. So we purchased enough for the backyard, the side yard. But the fence we're planning to put in is a 6-foot wooden fence, nice wooden fence.
And you can't see through it then, right?
Cannot see through it. That's correct.
Are you planning to paint it or stain it, or what are you planning to do with it?
We were gonna-
How do you preserve it?
We are planning to paint it in, well, actually, we haven't decided
We
about
haven't
paint or
decided,
stain.
but we were not planning on letting it get dilapidated. And we would have gone, we would have liked to have put a vinyl white fence up because they look so nice, in my opinion, again. Squibs have that and it looks very nice. But we have a dark brick house. It would have looked very awkward to have the dark brick with the white vinyl fence and.
Okay.
The intrusion of when you put that fence in the front yard, did you realize you were blocking your neighbor's yard and the vision of that person coming out?
It actually,
yes.
It actually, there is already a blockage there from the vision. We have some pictures to show.
If I may share some photos.
Okay.
A very valid concern. Comments were made about children riding bikes in the neighborhood. The only kids we see riding bikes in the neighborhood are ours, so we're very concerned with the safety of children and bike.
No.
Okay.
No.
I apologize. That was too general of a statement. The fact is, our children do bike in the neighborhood, and we are concerned with the safety of our children. So whether or not they're the only children, I apologize for that comment.
If anybody's concerned about safety of the children on bicycles, they ought to teach them to stop at the stop signs and not barrel through their intersection.
Mr. David Fry, may I comment that you prefaced your comments with irrelevant facts?
Excuse me, could you get back to answering my question?
Yeah.
You have,
and I would also like to state that his experience raising children is entirely irrelevant.
Excuse me.
Yes.
Let's go back to my question. That fence and that tree, isn't that an intrusion on your neighbor of her or him coming out of that garage? And
Extremely valid question, and I'm standing at the microphone so that I'm recorded, and then I'll show you the picture.
and
We have a picture that shows the viewpoint that is of concern, so I'll bring that to you.
This actually shows the view from the driveway of the home.
So here is, can I borrow this?
Sure.
Directly north of us.
So as it exists right now, when she would be in her driveway backing out and being concerned with the view down the street, here's Graham Drive. Make sure I get this correctly. There's Graham Drive.
And then there's
There's the big Colorado blue spruce. On their property right now, and presumably has been for years because this looks like a mature pampas grass type grass, there's a large tree, large shrub there, or grass that already impedes the view. So this is looking down Graham Drive. So this 6-foot fence, if you see right there, this is a stick my wife is holding up with an orange marker there that measures 6 feet. So you can see that this grass is already above where the fence line would be.
What she pointed out, though, was that you can see around and beyond and through,
But
to
I
a
can-
degree,
right.
grass, but you can't if it's solid fence.
To a degree, but I would argue that not much.
No.
I'd like to
No.
comment on that bush, if I may. That bush is trimmed every fall when it's dead, down to the ground, and it grows back up. So I mean-
Okay, so that's it, it's height.
It's a grass, it's a grass, it's cut, right.
But in fact, it's well over 6 feet right now.
They do get tall.
Put it inside our fence.
Yeah. You can't see through.
I'm satisfied.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And we need to say that.
Yeah, because this, yeah, go ahead.
Here is from the street looking, there's a much larger green space than she presumes. She doesn't know the property, she hasn't lived there yet. So she was talking about fence being 6 feet.
Okay,
I don't know,
so it's not going to be close to, it's not, that part will not be a problem. But, you know, coming forward, it is going to make a solid wall where there is, you can see motion through the grass, you can see, it's not wonderfully clear, terrible things could happen, but it's much less likely than with the fence. So,
And I
they are useful, would you like these in the record, or do you want to keep them?
Put them in the record.
Okay.
And I think it's important to note too, addressing the board, I don't know if they can hear us, but addressing the board, they can. It's important to note too that when backing down the driveway, and I've experimented, when backing down the driveway, one shouldn't back onto a street without looking to see where they are, if it's there. You can back down that driveway and get beyond the grass, which would be in fact well beyond the fence. You can back down that driveway, stop in your car at the curb line, the edge of the road, and easily see up and down the street both directions. So as far as the safety, it is, in that respect, somewhat irrelevant. You can see the road completely all the way down the intersection, past the tree.
Okay.
If you, does that
All
clarify?
right. Yes, it does, thank you. At least it does for me. Everybody clear? All right.
I don't know if you understood my point there.
Did you get it?
Yeah, safety's not the issue here.
Well, it is for some folks.
But it's not though.
Yeah, well, it's part of what the code is meant to address.
Yeah.
It's the intention of the code, but
Property
yeah.
owners' driveways.
Okay.
Not an issue here.
Is there anything else that you wanted to say with reference to what's already been stated by your neighbors? Any other rebuttal you have?
We didn't know we could get,
thank
rally
you.
the troops in support of this. And we didn't know that was an option. And we just moved to the neighborhood. And so that being said, you know, I feel like there are quite a few more people that are saying that they don't want this than those of us that are here saying we want this.
This may be entirely irrelevant, but I believe we have neighbors who we've made friendships with a little bit, who have smaller kids, who would probably, it's irrelevant, but they may be here to support us had we known that was.
Had you known. Well, the folks who really cared about it apparently, however, did show up this evening, and the ones who would have come for you probably would have done had they been aware that there would be so many others, but anyway.
I do want to comment that, yes, there are trees along Graham Drive, but not on our property. There's that one tree on that side yard.
Well, trees can be planted. I mean, that's not to stop you. So, anyway.
Just wanted to clarify that.
Okay.
I just want to make sure that our neighbors, and I guess it's back in the hands of the board now, but I want to make sure that our neighbors know that our fence we're hoping to build, whether it's on the setback or not, is going to be a nice fence. It's going to be a wooden fence. It'll be maintained just as the rest of the house will be maintained. Comment on the architecture. A question was, couldn't we have built the house up that side of the property and maintain the backyard? We looked at over 40 different architectural options, and the best thing for maintaining the property and having a nice yard was to put the house in back and have that front yard there. And one point of clarification to make sure, because even after Steve clarified, there was still some confusion. The fence is going to be set well back from the street, not right on the pavement.
Okay, that's good. It's important. Thank you. All right, then from the floor, the comment is closed. And let's see that you're looking like you're ready to take off. No, good. And we're you and me both.
I move to grant the variance
Okay.
on 20 Graham Drive, Zone R1. The appellant is requesting the variance from section 23.
Can I ask you to just stop for just a second?
Sure.
One of the things that he and I anyway, had discussed earlier,
Graham
or
was
just
in there.
briefly, just across you, was the possibility of doing two separate variances, one for the side yard and one for the front yard, since it's two separate ones. You haven't said that? You just want one? Okay. All right. Proceed. Thank you.
Appellant is requesting a variance from section 23.03.14 to permit construction of a fence with 0 to 4 foot setback where 12.5 feet and 12 and 25 feet are the permitted minimum.
Second.
Okay. It's been moved and seconded, and you need to consider what the practical difficulty or undue hardship would be at this property that would make it necessary to put a fence in this location.
There is no hardship because this could be developed with a smaller
Plenty of
size.
yard.
Okay, they've got a large yard. It is a sloped yard in the back, but there's an awful lot of yard on the side still. And a yard is a yard, whether it's in the back or the side of the house, it seems to me. I would have no problem with a side setback where they're wanting to put it, but since it's set up the way it's set up.
There's no reason for it,
I
because they got
can't.
plenty of yard.
They do have plenty of yard, and they're not going to be using that side. Apparently, what they want is a backyard. So the backyard's going to be the side part. Okay, exceptional circumstances.
No.
Any exceptional circumstance you can see that would require a different position of the fence?
No.
Okay. Property rights. Would literal interpretation deprive them of rights that others in the same vicinity have?
Deprive their neighbors.
Well, that would convey a special privilege to them if they were to be given a fence that enclosed more setback than the neighbors would be permitted. And and the minimum variance. Would this variance be the minimum required to make reasonable use of the property?
No. Not at all.
Would granting the variance be of substantial detriment to adjacent properties?
Yes.
A number of neighbors have thought so. And is this a variance that is so general or recurring that the situation would more reasonably be handled by changing the law? No. Roger? How do you vote?
No.
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 And I would like to be able to vote yes, but I also would have to vote no. You simply cannot meet any of the requirements for the variance. So if you object, however, within 30 days of the day that you receive the day that Steve mails the letter to you, then that would be the time to register your objection. And then that's 5 to, oh, Mr. Sligo's left, he's the one who wants to know.
And in fact, the tree outside would
Now
be better.
then, we only have one other thing that we have to do this evening, and I was not present at the last meeting, so I can't say
Looks good
about
to me.
It looks
Does
good,
everybody
okay, yeah.
I'm just here.
move that you approve?
I approve.
Does everybody agree that they are to be approved?
Sure. Yeah, good, yeah.
Okay. Minutes have been moved to approve. And we're now adjourned. Holy cow. I thought we were